Hello, everybody. We've got a whole bunch of new faces here tonight, so for those of you who are brand new to this, my name is Doug Heineman. I see another face that I actually know here. But I started Jayobi to try to help people finding positions, but now we're going to be going to step 2, which is the beginning to develop your marketing tools or your sales tools. And so it would be creating resumes, cover letters to really to get you noticed. Usually whenever the resume is first received, it goes through a 2-step screening process. And if you have a cover letter, when they first receive it, cover letter is usually flipped over, it's not even read. Then what they're going to do is they're going to scan very quickly through the resume. In fact, in our organization, we call it a 20-second resume, but about 15 to 20 seconds or so is all it's going to get. If you capture the attention of the reader, you'll stay on the desk. And then what will happen during a second screening, a more comprehensive screening, they'll actually flip the cover letter back over, read that word for word, and then they'll read your resume word for word. So it's kind of like a 1-2 punch. First you have to bring them in with a jab, but then you have to have the content to really sell yourself. But once again, if you don't capture them in that first 15 or 20 seconds, you're either going to be sent down to HR, put into a file, or put into file 13, into the trash can. With regard to the length of the document, once again, you have to look at the marketing situation itself, your audience, who you're going after, how you're trying to promote yourself, and you want to use the document that would be most effective for you. And sometimes people will think, well, gee, it has to be a 1-page document, and I've got 20 years of experience, so I have to try to cram that onto 1 page. Once again, if you have 20 years of experience, you're trying to cram onto 1 page, and it's just a sea of words, that's not going to be scannable in 15 seconds. So, it's much better to have a much more scannable 2-page document as opposed to a totally crammed 1-page document. There's basically 3 different types of resumes out there. In fact, on these sheets, that are out for all of you, I actually have examples of all the different forms of resumes, and also an example of a cover letter for you. And of course, if you're following this on the internet, it's downloadable on right on the same page. But with the 3 different forms, and you look at it, there's almost a spectrum. But at one end of the spectrum is what is called a chronological resume, and at the polar opposite, other end of the spectrum is what is called a functional type resume. And then in between is what is called a combination type resume. So of course now we have to determine, okay, well, what is the best form of resume for you and your background and what you're wanting to go after? Most people are probably pretty familiar with what a chronological resume is. In fact, if you're looking on these examples here, it's John Q. Public. It would be the very first one. But a chronological resume, like the name implies, the format of it is really, it's based on a reverse chronological order, going through the dates and then stating your employer, your title, your duties, your responsibilities, your accomplishments, but then going one employer back. And then you keep on going back through your employment history. A chronological type resume is most effective is if you are in an industry, or let's say if you have a very linear progression through your work history. So for example, let's say you're an accountant, and you graduate with your accounting degree. And then after that you work 2 years in a public accounting firm, CPA firm, so then you get your CPA designation. And then you work for another accounting firm, and let's say I'm looking for a new position, and what do I want to be? I want to be an accountant. In a chronological type format, you're basically following, step by step from education and through each one of your employers, you're kind of following a ramp of accounting. So once again, that would be an example where a chronological type resume would actually be very good and very effective for you. Other types of resumes, or the other side of the spectrum, is what is called a functional resume. And if you look, and you actually have to look on the back side, but it's Betty Q. Public. And, but if you look at a functional type resume, a purely functional resume does not have, usually, a single date on it at all. So once again, it's kind of like the exact opposite of what a chronological type resume is, which is based on dates. There's usually not even a listing of an employer anywhere on it. It's really just functional skills or transferable skills that would be listed. Now, once again, this is a very rare type of a document. Most people don't usually use a functional type resume, and it's usually not effective for most people. But where it would be effective, generally speaking, is if you're trying to, for example, hide something. I mean, if you have a situation where you've got like a major gap in your employment history, chronological obviously would make it, very, very apparent. And, someone would look and say, hey, what have you been doing? And in fact, I'll give you an example. I actually worked with somebody, this was actually several years ago, but kind of a funny example of when we used a functional type resume. But I was working with somebody, he was a senior level guy, he was a CFO with an organization, and he, the president of the organization, and one other person in the company, they got kind of caught in an embezzling situation, which, and mind you, way back when that was really rare. I mean, nowadays that's pretty commonplace, it seems to be. But whenever I was working with him, he had 18 months that he could not account for on his resume. And can anybody guess where he was? I'm in jail. And actually, whenever I began working with him, it was about 6 months after that. So it was actually about a 2-year gap in his employment history. And once again, with a chronological type resume, the very first question out of any employer would be, what have you been doing for the last 2 years? And in fact, it probably wouldn't even get into an interview, because if they saw it on his document, it wouldn't pass the muster. I mean, they wouldn't even bring him in for an interview. So that would be like a really extreme situation where you'd want to use a document like this. But if you have like major gaps in employment. The third type of document is what is called a combination type resume. And if you think about the spectrum, once again, you've got a chronological on one side and you've got a functional type document on the other. But then in between is what is called a combination type resume. And, and it may have more of the, the feeling of a functional type document, or depending on, where you are in the spectrum, it may be more towards a chronological type, document. But basically what a combination document does, and the example would be actually Susan Q. Public, which would be on page 2. So that would be an example, or a good example of a combination type resume. But it really marries the qualities of both the functional and the combination type resume together. This is actually, for most people, the most effective type of a document. Once again, unless somebody has a perfectly linear, job search, a career path where you'd be using something like a chronological type resume. Usually there's, some people say, well, I'm interested in this market, I'm interested in that market, and my background isn't totally consistent. I mean, most people don't have that, once again, that perfectly linear, type of a career path. So a combination type resume, has the benefit of, showing your good, solid work experience, in the chronological component, but then it fills in the gaps with the, the functional part, or the, transferable skills type. There's a saying in marketing that packaging is part of the product. Of course, you are the product, but your resumes and cover letters are your packaging, so you want to make sure that they're top rate. How you capture a reader in the first 20 seconds is through good presentation, proper formatting, and a quality image. You want to start every phrase in your resume with an action word. Things like developed, created, supervised, spearheaded, managed, implemented. These will help to grab the attention of the potential employer. And potential employers are not interested in the duties and responsibilities of your position. They really want to know what makes you different from your competition. And it's going to be your accomplishments, achievements, and results that will do that. You want to make sure that you sell and not tell about your background. You want the resume to promote your skills and expertise. You don't want the resume to read like an obituary. Lastly, I've supplied numerous samples of resumes and cover letters for you that you can use as a model to help make your resume much more effective.